Kool C. He came up in the late 1980s as part of Philadelphia's rising rap scene. Back then, he formed a group with fellow Philly rappers Steady B and another member known as Ultimate Ease. Together, they called themselves CEB, short for Countin' Endless Bank. It was a flashy name that captured the energy of the era, that golden age of hip-hop when everyone was chasing money, fame, and street respect. But for Kool C and his crew, that name would end up being more than just a catchy title. It became a grim prophecy. At first, things looked promising. Kool C had carved out a space for himself in the Philly rap world with a smooth delivery and confident persona. He had the image, the flow, and a few solid hits to his name.
Yo, what's up? What's up, man? Yo, y'all see my new video, Glamorous Life, man? Stop.
But like a lot of artists from that time, when the record sales started slowing down and the royalty checks stopped rolling in, the glamorous lifestyle they'd once rapped about became harder to maintain. And instead of finding another lane in the industry, Kool C and his friends tried to live out the image that had once sold records. That decision would change their lives forever. On the morning of January 2nd, 1996, Kool C, Steady B, and another accomplice set out to rob a PNC bank in Philadelphia. It was meant to be a big score, but what they imagined as a clean, quick heist turned into pure chaos. Within minutes of the robbery beginning, the bank's silent alarm was triggered. Philadelphia police officer Loretta Baird responded to the call. She was doing her job protecting her city, completely unaware that she was about to walk into one of the darkest moments in Philly's history. In the confusion that followed, a shot rang out, and Officer Baird was struck and killed. She became the first female Philadelphia police officer ever killed in the line of duty. It didn't take long for investigators to piece together what happened. The arrest came shortly after, and it sent shockwaves through both the hip-hop community and the city of Philadelphia. Kool C maintained his innocence from the start. He told police and the court that he was at home with his mother when the robbery happened, but as the trial unfolded, the evidence painted a different picture. Witnesses placed him at the scene, and prosecutors built a solid case linking him directly to the crime. Kool C was now facing a first-degree murder charge for killing a police officer. By November of 1996, the verdict came down. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to death. It was a stunning fall from grace, a once promising rapper now condemned to die for a desperate crime that went horribly wrong.
These guys in the 80s were hot rappers. Like, what do you think led them to, their lives to get to the point of actually robbing a bank and, killing a police officer and everything?
Things change, man. It's hard to keep up with time. Times change or whatever, so you never know what people going through, their situation, their trials and tribulations, and their responsibilities sometimes drive them to do negative things, to feed their families or do whatever they got to do.
After the sentencing, Kool C was transferred to death row, where he's remained ever since. Nearly 3 decades later, he's still there, caught in a state of legal limbo. Over the years, his execution date has been set several times, only to be delayed or canceled due to ongoing appeals. In January 2015, a death warrant was signed, but a judge put it on hold the following month. Not long after that, Pennsylvania's governor announced a moratorium on executions, meaning that while Kool C's death sentence technically still stands, it's unlikely to ever be carried out. Now at 55 years old, Kool C has spent almost 30 years living under the shadow of that sentence. He continues to file appeals and maintains his innocence, but outside of the legal system, his voice has largely vanished. And unlike other rappers who managed to keep their music or their message alive behind bars, Kool C faded out of the public eye. Steady B. He was one of the early architects of Philly hip-hop. He came up in the mid-1980s when the city was just starting to carve out its identity in rap. Alongside artists like DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince and Schoolie D, Steady B helped put Philadelphia on the map. His confident delivery, clever rhymes, and sharp production earned him respect as one of the pioneers of the Hilltop Hustlers crew, a collective that represented the sound and energy of North Philly.
And I got my man Steady B right here from the old school, from the Hilltop.
Back then, Steady B was seen as one of the bright hopes for East Coast hip-hop outside of New York. He dropped several albums, including Bring the Beat Back, which became one of his standout hits. For a while, it looked like he was on his way to national recognition, but hip-hop moves fast, and by the early 90s, the spotlight had shifted. The golden era gave way to gangsta rap, and new voices from the South and West Coast began dominating the airwaves. For Steady B, the phone stopped ringing, the shows got smaller, and the money dried up. Trying to reclaim the magic, he teamed up with fellow Philly rapper Cool C to form a new group called CEB, short for Countin' Endless Bank. CEB was meant to be their comeback, their shot at regaining relevance and getting back to the money, but instead, it marked the beginning of their downfall.
Well, you know, CEB, that's Cool C, DJ Ease, and myself, Steady B. As you all know, me and Cool been down for a while. I produced 2 albums that he had on Atlantic. I had 5 albums out on Job. So we came together, we just came together just to give a public a new look. We decided to just make a group. You know what I mean? CEB, that was our name.
By the mid-1990s, both Steady B and Cool C were struggling. The rap checks had stopped coming, and the industry that once celebrated them had moved on. Out of desperation, they made a decision that would destroy everything they had built. On the morning of January 2, 1996, they decided to rob a PNC bank in Philadelphia. Cool C and another accomplice went inside, while Steady B waited outside in the getaway car, the engine running. The plan was simple: get in, grab the money, and get out. But things spiraled out of control in seconds. A silent alarm alerted the police, and Officer Loretha Baird responded to the call. When she entered the bank, chaos erupted. A gun went off and Officer Baird was struck and killed. She became the first female officer in Philadelphia's history to die in the line of duty. That one moment changed everything. Within hours, the police were on the trail. Investigators found the weapons used in the robbery and traced them back to Steady B. When detectives showed up at his apartment, the evidence was overwhelming. He broke down and confessed, admitting that he had been the getaway driver. During questioning, he also revealed details that implicated Cool C and their third partner, Mark Canty. At trial, the prosecution's case was airtight. One of the key witnesses was Steady B's wife, Lynette Medley, who testified that the men returned to their apartment right after the robbery. According to her, they sat down to watch the news coverage of the shooting, panicking as the reality of what just happened began to sink in. Her testimony matched the statements given by Canty, confirming that Steady B had played a crucial role in the botched heist. While it was clear that Steady B hadn't pulled the trigger, the law didn't care. Under Pennsylvania's felony murder rule, anyone who participates in a serious felony like armed robbery is held legally responsible if someone dies during the crime. It doesn't matter if you're the lookout, the planner, or the getaway driver. If a life is lost, everyone involved faces the same punishment. That law sealed Steady B's fate. In October 1996, Warren Steady B McGlone was convicted of second-degree murder, robbery, and related charges. The judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Mark Canty, the third man in the car, received the same sentence. Cool C, who was identified as the shooter, was sentenced to death. Since his conviction, Steady B has spent nearly 30 years behind bars, serving out his sentence at the State Correctional Institution in Houtsdale, Pennsylvania. Big Lurch. In the early 1990s, he was making his mark in a small but shockingly vivid corner of hip-hop known as horrorcore. This subgenre wasn't about bragging or street tales, it was all about the macabre. Artists in horrorcore thrived on fear, crafting music that felt like a soundtrack to a slasher film. Murder, blood, and psychological horror were part of the aesthetic, and Big Lurch fit the mold perfectly. Standing at a towering 6'6" with a deep, gravelly voice, he embodied the character he rapped about. His lyrics were laced with references to serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer and horror movie villains such as Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger. But what began as performance soon blurred into something terrifyingly real. Behind the music, Big Lurch was spiraling. His career never took off the way he hoped, and he fell deep into substance abuse, particularly PCP, a hallucinogenic drug notorious for its unpredictable and violent effects. That combination, horror-filled lyrics and mind-altering drugs, would prove deadly. On April 10, 2002, inside a small apartment in South Los Angeles, the line between art and insanity completely vanished. That morning, police responded to a 911 call that led them to a gruesome crime scene. 21-year-old Tynesha Ysace, Singleton's roommate, was found dead. Her body had been mutilated in ways that stunned even veteran detectives. Her chest had been torn open, a knife blade was lodged in her shoulder blade, and parts of her lungs were missing. To make matters worse, investigators found bite marks on her face and chest. Human bite marks. Witnesses said they found Singleton outside the apartment, completely naked and covered head to toe in blood. He was standing in the middle of the street, looking up at the sky, seemingly detached from reality. The sight was so disturbing that officers initially thought they were witnessing a scene out of a horror movie rather than a real-life crime. Forensic analysis later revealed something even more shocking. Pieces of human flesh were found in Singleton's stomach. It was scientific proof that he had eaten part of his victim. News headlines exploded across the country, branding him instantly as the cannibal rapper.
But a mother named Carolyn thinks about what happened to her daughter.
And I feel everyone should know what happened to her because it was a brutal murder. He chewed a part of her intestine.
As the case went to trial, Singleton's lawyers tried to argue that he was not in his right mind during the killing. They claimed he was heavily under the influence of PCP and had no understanding of what he was doing. According to testimony, he and his ex-boyfriend had both been using PCP the day before the murder. The defense argued that in his drugged state, Singleton lost touch with reality and fell into the nightmarish world he often described in his music. But the court wasn't convinced. The judge ruled that voluntary intoxication, no matter how severe, wasn't a valid defense for such a brutal act. The evidence was undeniable. Singleton had murdered his roommate in an act of extreme violence. In November 2003, Antron Big Lurch Singleton was convicted of first-degree murder and aggravated mayhem. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Since that day, Singleton has been serving his sentence in the California state prison system, where he has remained for over 2 decades. Locked away, he occasionally speaks about the case, maintaining that he was set up and that the real story was twisted by the media. Even the victim's mother, surprisingly, has expressed some belief that more might have been going on behind the scenes. C. Murder. In the late 90s, when No Limit Records was running the rap game, one voice stood out from the rest of the empire. That was Corey C. Murder Miller. He wasn't the flashy businessman like his brother Master P, nor the radio-friendly voice like Silk the Shocker. C. Murder was the grit, the pulse of the streets that gave No Limit its edge. Fans called him the street voice of the label, and for good reason. Before the fame and the gold chains, Miller had actually lived a pretty structured life. He graduated high school and even served in the U.S. Army as a combat medic during the Gulf War. But after returning home to New Orleans, the pull of the streets and eventually music became too strong to ignore. What started as therapy through rhymes quickly became a career. His 1998 debut album Life or Death went platinum, and his follow-up Bossellini sold over 175,000 copies in its first week. Alongside P and Silk, the trio formed the group True, helping define the No Limit sound that dominated Southern rap at the time. But by the early 2000s, C. Murder's music began to mirror his lifestyle a little too closely. The blurred line between his lyrics and his reality was becoming dangerous. In 2001, things took a serious turn. C. Murder got into trouble after an altercation at Club Rags in Baton Rouge. Security footage later showed a scuffle breaking out after a bouncer refused him entry because he was carrying a gun. In the chaos, a shot went off, and witnesses claimed Miller tried to fire again, but the gun jammed. The incident led to attempted murder charges and painted a picture of a man spiraling deeper into the violent world he only once rapped about. But that wouldn't be the end of it. What came next would change his life forever. In the early morning hours of January 12, 2002, chaos erupted at the Platinum Club in Harvey, Louisiana. C. Murder and his entourage got into a fight inside the club, and when it was all over, a 16-year-old named Steve Thomas was dead. The teenager wasn't an enemy. He was actually a fan who admired the rapper. Witnesses claim that C. Murder and his crew beat the boy before he was fatally shot. Some even said the rapper shouted out a defiant line right before the gun went off, reinforcing his gangsta image.
I grabbed Corey. I'm like, chill, big dog. So he's like, all right, cool, big dog, cool. But he went back to fighting. So when he went back to fighting, I heard that pow.
Steve Thomas was just lying there in a pool of blood. He ended up dying from a single gunshot wound to the heart.
Days later, police arrested Miller and charged him with second-degree murder. The headlines exploded. His image as a street soldier turned into that of a man on trial for murder. The No Limit empire, once at its peak, began to crumble, and C. Murder's career froze in its tracks. His first trial in 2003 resulted in a conviction, but it didn't last. The ruling was overturned when it came out that prosecutors had withheld criminal background information about key witnesses. It was a major break for Miller. He was released in 2006 on a $500,000 bond and placed under house arrest. During that time, he released new music and even a novel titled Death Around the Corner, reflecting on his life and the streets that shaped him. But freedom didn't last long. In 2009, C. Murder was retried, and this time, he was once again convicted of second-degree murder. The verdict was controversial from the start. It wasn't unanimous. The jury voted 10-2, a decision-making process that was later ruled unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. Even more troubling, one of the jurors, Mary Jacob, came forward claiming she was pressured by other jurors to change her vote from not guilty to guilty. The NAACP even called for an investigation into the handling of the case, but despite the public outrage, nothing changed. C. Murder was sentenced to life in prison at hard labor without the possibility of parole and sent to one of the toughest prisons in America, the Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola. Behind bars, C. Murder never stopped fighting for his freedom. He maintained his innocence from day one, insisting he didn't pull the trigger that night. Over the years, his case became a rallying cry for criminal justice reform advocates, especially after new information came to light. In 2018, two key witnesses, Kenneth Jordan and Darnell Jordan, publicly recanted their testimonies. They claimed the police pressured and even threatened them to identify C. Murder as the shooter. Kenneth Jordan went on national TV saying detectives threatened him with jail time if he didn't cooperate. Darnell Jordan said he was detained and locked in a hotel room until he agreed to testify against Miller.
I never seen a gun, never, ever. When I pulled Corey from the fight, his hands like this, no weapon. None.
Those revelations reignited public interest in the case. Celebrities like Kim Kardashian and singer Monica, who had a long history with C. Murder, began campaigning for his release. Fans rallied online, calling his conviction a miscarriage of justice. But despite the growing attention and the recanted testimonies, the state of Louisiana refused to overturn his sentence. Even as recently as late 2023, a federal judge ruled against him, claiming the new witness statements were unreliable. Still, from within Angola's walls, C. Murder has refused to let the system silence him. He found ways to keep his music and his message alive. Using a handheld recorder, he managed to release albums like The Truest Dish I Ever Said and Ain't No Heaven in the Pen, giving fans raw insight into his reality behind bars. In 2018, he went on a hunger strike to protest prison conditions and the alleged corruption surrounding his case. And in 2024, he launched the Corey Miller Diaries podcast, telling his story directly to the world and speaking up for others who he believes were wrongfully convicted. Max B. Long before he became a rap icon, Max, real name Charlie Wingate, had already served 8 years behind bars for robbery from 1997 to 2005. By the time he came home, he wasn't the same kid who went in. He came out hungry, focused, and ready to make noise. When Max B hit the scene, he brought something new. His laid-back delivery, drenched in confidence and swagger, introduced a new sound to New York hip-hop. He called it being wavy. The term caught on instantly, spreading through the streets and into the mainstream. Everyone wanted to be wavy. Max's big break came through fellow Harlem native Jim Jones, who brought him into the Bird Gang family, an extension of the Diplomats or Dipset, the crew that dominated New York hip-hop in the mid-2000s. With Max B's distinctive hooks and street charm, Bird Gang's music began to stand out even more. But fame, money, and ego can change the chemistry in any crew, and soon, cracks began to show. At first, Max and Jim seemed unstoppable. Max contributed heavily to Jones's biggest records, including the massive hit We Fly High, but behind the scenes, the tension was brewing. Max felt like he wasn't being treated fairly, claiming that while Jim was cashing big checks, he was only being handed a few $100s here and there, despite writing and performing on major songs. He started speaking out about the money, the credit, and what he saw as betrayal. Before long, their friendship turned into one of Harlem's most talked about beefs. Max B aired out his frustrations publicly, mocking Jim on DVDs, interviews, and mixtapes. By 2008, the split between Max and the Bird Gang was official. He was done with Dipset, and the feud became legendary.
So Max B, now you, my friend, you had a falling out with Jim Jones, right?
Yeah, we had our mutual differences.
Oh, you weren't there, but you did get arrested. Explain what happened that night.
I can't.
Okay. Did Jim Jones bail you out?
No.
Let y'all know I wasn't f***ing with that dick in the mouth, Milli Vanilli ass Jim.
With Jim Jones behind him, Max linked up with another rising New York name, French Montana from the Bronx. Together, they created the Coke Wave mixtape series, a blend of smooth melodies, street grit, and braggadocious energy that would influence an entire generation of rappers. Max's charisma was undeniable, and even as drama surrounded him, his star only seemed to grow brighter. But the same reckless energy that fueled his music also led him into the kind of situation that would destroy his freedom. The story that took Max B down started back in September 2006. Around that time, Max was dealing with his on-and-off girlfriend, Gina Conway, who had started seeing another man, a guy named Alan Plowden. According to reports, Conway told Max that her new boyfriend drove a flashy Mercedes and carried large amounts of cash. To Max, it must have sounded like an easy come-up. The idea of robbing Plowden was allegedly born out of jealousy and greed. Max B wasn't there when things went wrong, but he was accused of putting the plan together. He allegedly enlisted his stepbrother, Kevin Leardom, to carry out the robbery at a Holiday Inn in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Conway played her part, luring Plowden to the hotel room while Leardom prepared to rob him. But things spiraled out of control. When Plowden's associate, David Taylor, arrived at the scene, chaos broke out, and Leardom ended up shooting and killing Taylor. That single gunshot sealed everyone's fate. Even though Max B wasn't there, the law didn't care. Because the murder happened during the commission of a robbery he allegedly helped plan, he was held just as responsible as if he had pulled the trigger himself. It was the felony murder rule. Gina Conway, the woman who once stood by him, became the star witness for the prosecution. Facing her own serious charges, she struck a plea deal and gave a lengthy 169-page statement to the court, painting Max as the mastermind behind the failed robbery. Her testimony crushed his defense. In June 2009, Max B was found guilty on 9 of 11 counts, including conspiracy to commit robbery and felony murder. 3 months later, a New Jersey judge hit him with one of the harshest sentences imaginable: 75 years in prison. That meant he wouldn't even be eligible for parole until the year 2042. For many, it looked like the end of the wave. But in a strange twist, prison didn't bury Max B's legacy. The same day he was sentenced, the Free Max B movement began. Fans, DJs, and even major artists kept his name alive. Rappers from Kanye West to Wiz Khalifa to A$AP Rocky all credited him as an influence. Even behind bars, Max managed to record vocals for features, phoning in verses from prison and keeping his voice in rotation. The legend of Max B grew bigger than ever. Then in 2016 came the biggest update to his story yet. After years of appeals, his conviction was vacated, and he reached a plea deal for a single count of aggravated manslaughter. The charge reduced his 75-year sentence to 20 years. After serving more than 16 years, Max B's story is finally heading toward redemption. In 2025, the New Jersey State Parole Board officially approved his release plan. He's set to walk out of Northern State Prison on November 9, 2025, at 47 years old. A free man with 5 years of probation ahead of him. South Park Mexican. Carlos Coy, better known by his stage name South Park Mexican or simply SPM, was one of Houston's most talked about rappers in the late 90s. He built his name from the ground up, becoming a hometown hero with a sharp lyrics, raw stories, and signature southern drawl. Coming out of Houston's South Park neighborhood, Coy started making music in 1994, and it didn't take long for him to stand out. Tracks like High So High turned him into a rising star, with fans drawn to his mix of street realism and catchy, singable hooks. Coy wasn't just a rapper, he was a businessman. He founded his own label, Dope House Records, creating a home base for his music and for other local artists who didn't fit nearly into the mainstream system. Through hustle and determination, he turned his independent label into a southern powerhouse. While major labels were still skeptical about the Texas sound, Coy proved there was money and loyalty in the streets. By 2000, SPM had broken out of the underground scene and into the national spotlight. His album Never Change, released in 2001, was distributed nationally and pushed him into a new tier of fame. At that moment, he was on top, a successful independent artist with real money, real fans, and the respect of a city. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, his life took a sharp, irreversible turn. In September 2001, Carlos Coy's career came to a crashing halt. Authorities issued a warrant for his arrest after disturbing allegations surfaced. A 9-year-old girl accused him of SA during a sleepover at his home. The story sent shockwaves through Houston's music scene. As the investigation went deeper, more allegations surfaced. Multiple underage girls reportedly came forward with similar claims, each adding more weight to the already serious charges. The trial that followed was one of the most highly publicized cases in Houston's history. Coy, for his part, maintained that he was being set up and that the accusations were false. But in 2002, after weeks of testimony and emotional witness statements, the Houston jury found him guilty of aggravated SA of a child. On May 18, 2002, the verdict was read, and less than 2 weeks later, the judge handed down a 45-year prison sentence.
45-year sentence for the rapper known as the South Park Mexican for a 9-year-old girl last year.
Under Texas law, Coy was required to serve at least half of that sentence, more than 22 years, before even being considered for parole. His projected release date was set for 2047, meaning that the majority of his adult life and certainly his creative prime would be spent behind bars. For many, it was the end of the South Park Mexican story, but for Coy, the walls of the Ramsey unit in Rosharon, Texas, didn't silence his voice completely. Even from prison, SBM managed to stay connected to his audience. His fan base, loyal to the core, continued to support him through letters, artwork, and online campaigns. Coy found ways to keep making music, sometimes literally recording verses over the phone and sending them out to producers. These recordings turned into full albums, like When Devils Strike in 2006 and The Son of Norma in 2014. Both projects charted. While serving time, Coy also began to write prolifically. He filled notebooks with poems, songs, and even short stories, using his isolation as fuel for creativity. From behind bars, he tried to turn his experience into art, even as his public reputation outside the prison walls remained deeply divided. For years, his supporters held out hope that he might be released early. As 2024 approached, anticipation grew. It was the year SBM would finally become eligible for parole after more than 2 decades behind bars. In October 2024, his case went before the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, and his fans flooded social media with campaigns demanding his freedom. But in January 2025, the board issued its decision: parole denied. They cited the severity of his crime and ongoing concerns about public safety as the main reasons. The denial meant Coy would remain in prison for at least 3 more years before another review, which isn't scheduled until 2028. At this point, Carlos Coy had spent over 23 years locked up, and unless future parole boards ruled differently, he could remain incarcerated into his late 70s. X-rated. He came up in the early 1990s straight out of Sacramento, California. He wasn't just another rapper trying to make it, he was part of a new, raw wave of West Coast artists who took gangster rap to its most unfiltered level. His lyrics were dark, unapologetic, and full of violent storytelling that felt too real to be fiction. In 1992, he dropped his debut album, Psychoactive, and it instantly stood out. It painted vivid pictures of street life filled with gunfire, revenge, and survival. It was also the first release from Black Market Records, a label that would become a cornerstone of independent West Coast rap. X-Rated quickly became a major figure in the city's music scene, earning local celebrity status. His influence ran so deep that even Dr. Dre reportedly tried to buy the Black Market name, proof of the movement he helped spark.
My album, Psychoactive, ended up becoming the first album ever released by Black Market Records. I'm like the LL Cool J of Black Market Records.
And when Dr. Dre left Death Row and he was trying to start his new label, he actually tried to buy the Black Market name.
But that same year, 1992, Honore Brown's real life took a dark turn. He and several others were involved in a gang-related home invasion in Sacramento. The break-in turned violent, and during the chaos, a woman named Patricia Harris was shot and killed. The police quickly tied the case to X-Rated and his crew. What happened next would turn his case into one of the earliest and most infamous examples of what's now known as the rap trap, when prosecutors use a rapper's lyrics as literal evidence of guilt. During his trial, the prosecution didn't just focus on what happened that night, they went after his music. They claimed his violent lyrics weren't fiction or art, they were confessions. They played songs from Psychoactive in the courtroom, pointing out every violent line and arguing that they reflected Brown's real thoughts and intentions. They even brought up the album cover, which showed him holding a gun, suggesting it was similar to the weapon used in the murder. For many watching the case, it raised uncomfortable questions. Could a rapper's lyrics really be used to prove guilt? Could imagination be treated as a crime? But for X-Rated, those questions didn't matter much in the end. In 1996, after a long legal battle, Honore Brown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 31 years to life in prison. His career, which had barely begun, was effectively over, or so everyone thought. Instead of letting his career die, he found a way to keep it alive from behind bars. Using whatever resources he could find, he recorded music from inside his cell, sometimes literally rapping through prison phone lines. Over the years, he somehow managed to release more than 14 albums from prison. Each project told a story of struggle and survival, but also of transformation. As time went on, Brown's lyrics shifted from anger and revenge to reflection and growth. He began to use his platform to talk about the realities of incarceration, redemption, and the human spirit. But prison life came with its own dangers too. In 2010, he was stabbed 7 times after refusing to record an album for a prison gang.
Well, you got stabbed multiple times.
Yeah, I did get stabbed, yeah.
Now, this is in the middle of the hope at the end of the, you see, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. From what I understand, you were essentially approached to help put out some music from somebody in prison, and you said no or something?
After spending 26 years behind bars, Honore Brown was finally granted parole and released in September 2018. Reports reveal that even fellow inmates, including the infamous Menendez brothers, had written letters supporting his parole, praising his personal growth and commitment to helping others while incarcerated. Once he was free, Brown made it clear that he was done living as X-Rated, the gang member. He started using his real name publicly and focused on building a new life. In interviews, he spoke openly about how he'd grown up, about how violence and street life had taken too much from him, and how he wanted to inspire others to choose a different path. In 2022, he released an album called The Execution of X-Rated, a symbolic goodbye to the persona that had both made him famous and helped put him behind bars. Mac. For a young rapper coming out of New Orleans in the late 1990s, signing to Master P's No Limit Records was like hitting the jackpot, and McKinley Mac Phipps Jr. was one of the most talented lyricists to ever touch the No Limit roster. Everyone around him believed he was on the road to superstardom, but instead of becoming one of hip-hop's great success stories, his life took a devastating turn. Mac's story began long before No Limit. As a teenager, he was known as Lil Mac, dropping his first album, The Lyrical Midget, back in 1990 when he was only 13. Even then, his talent stood out. He had a sharp pen, an intelligent approach to storytelling, and a flow that was years ahead of his age. When he later linked up with Master P and joined No Limit, he transformed into Mac the Camouflage Assassin. His debut No Limit album, Shell Shocked, came out in 1998 and was an instant hit. The following year, he dropped World War III, an even more confident and polished project that helped cement him as one of the label's most respected voices. He was also a member of the 504 Boys, the New Orleans-based collective that represented No Limit's core movement. Everything seemed to be aligning perfectly. He had the fame, the respect, and the future every young rapper dreamed of. But beneath all the success was the reality of the world he came from, and that blurred line would eventually destroy everything he built. On the night of February 21, 2000, Mac was performing at an open mic event at Club Mercedes in Slidell, Louisiana. What started as a regular night ended in chaos when a fight broke out in the crowd. Within moments, shots were fired and 19-year-old Baron Victor Jr. was killed. Initially, several witnesses identified other men as the shooter, but that soon changed. As the investigation unfolded, the spotlight turned to Mac.
So they came over there and asked me, "Are you Mac?" I said, "No, I'm his father." And they said that, Mac is wanted for a murder.
The case that followed would become one of the most infamous examples of what's now known as the rap trap, a tactic where prosecutors use an artist's lyrics to prove criminal intent. During Mac's trial, the prosecution argued that his violent lyrics were a reflection of who he truly was. They quoted lines from his song Murda Murda Kill Kill as supposed proof that he was capable of murder, treating his music not as art but as confession. The defense fought back, explaining that Mac's music was fiction, a creative portrayal of the environment he grew up in, not a diary of his actions. But the damage was done.
One song was Murder, Murder, Kill, Kill, which was like a straight battle rap. Other one was a song called Shell Shock, and the line that they referred to was actually a line about my father. They said, this young man said, murder, murder, kill, kill. If you F with me, I'll put a bullet in your brain.
Even worse, the case was filled with inconsistencies. Multiple witnesses later came forward saying they felt pressured to testify against him. Reports even surfaced that a security guard had privately confessed to being one who fired the fatal shot, a claim the authorities dismissed. Despite the shaky evidence and the lack of any physical proof tying him to the crime, Mac was convicted of manslaughter in 2001 and sentenced to 30 years in prison. He began serving his time at the Elaine Hunt Correctional Center. While locked up, Mac never gave up hope. He kept writing music, mentoring younger inmates, and earning a spotless prison record. His story gained national attention as journalists and activists began to dig deeper into the details of his trial. In 2021, ABC News released a documentary titled Rap Trap, Mac Phipps, which exposed how prosecutors had used his lyrics to secure his conviction. By that point, Mac had already served 2 decades, 21 years of his life lost behind bars for a crime he maintained he didn't commit. His family, fans, and legal team fought relentlessly for his release, highlighting the coercion, inconsistencies, and flawed evidence that defined his trial. And finally, in early 2021, their persistence paid off. The Louisiana Board of Pardons and Parole reviewed his case and unanimously recommended him for clemency. On April 8, 2021, Governor John Bel Edwards signed off on that recommendation, officially commuting his sentence. After 21 long years, McKinley Mac Phipps Jr. walked out of prison in June 2021, a free man. His release was emotional not just for his family, but for countless fans who had been shouting "Free Mac" for years. Since regaining his freedom, Mac has slowly rebuilt his life. He's returned to music, releasing new songs that reflect the man he's become. But beyond music, he's taken on a bigger mission, advocating for criminal justice reform and speaking out about wrongful convictions.